Well, it's my pleasure to introduce our first presenter, Steve Strong. Steve is the president of Solar Design Associates, an interdisciplinary firm of professionals dedicated to the design, engineering, and implementation of renewable energy for residential, commercial, institutional, and utility clients, and he's served them all. He founded the firm in 1974 and has been in his current position for 45 years. Not many people can say that. SDA has designed renewable energy systems worldwide, including the U.S. Embassy in Geneva, the King Abdullah University of Science and Technology in Saudi Arabia, Massachusetts Maritime Academy, the Olympic Village in Atlanta, the Tiger Woods Center, and the White House, and this is a very abbreviated list. He graduated in engineering from Northeastern University and studied architecture at the Boston Architectural Center. Please welcome our morning keynote, Steve Strong.
What we're going to do is basically look at solar in every application that you can imagine. When I got started, photovoltaics were not quite ready for prime time, and so we were working on solar thermal systems for space heating and domestic hot water. They're still very relevant today and have been much improved since that time. This is one of the largest domestic water heating systems in New England at the time, and this is a condominium village in northern New England in New Hampshire that is heated by solar thermal. We were very impatient about getting started with photovoltaics and were privileged to be asked by MIT, or invited by MIT, to design the first lived-in residence in the world that would be totally powered by solar energy and export electricity to the utility grid. This was in 1978-79. The Carlisle House received worldwide acclaim, a generous amount of photovoltaics because, of course, it was rather inefficient at the time, roof-integrated solar thermal, internal thermal mass, super insulation, air and moisture barriers, daylighting, passive gain, and a surplus of energy that's exported to the grid. Shortly thereafter, we were asked by a major utility in Massachusetts to design a house that would be representative of trends in technology that would be commonplace 25 years fast forward. The project became known as the Impact 2000 House. Once word got out, PBS decided to have a national TV series to chronicle the design and construction. At the time, we were building these things ourselves because nobody else knew how. We were learning. After the TV series, I wrote a book talking about what the future should bring, and Home Magazine commissioned an article, How You'll Live in 2012. Roof-integrated photovoltaics, roof-integrated solar thermal, roof-integrated daylighting, lots of passive gain, earth sheltering, internal thermal mass, high levels of insulation and air sealing, air-to-air heat exchangers, heat recovery, ventilation, et cetera, et cetera. You know the list. It's now familiar these days. What isn't familiar to most people is that the majority of residences in history have been net zero. The reliance on petroleum has just been, in terms of history, a relatively new phenomenon. Following the Impact 2000 House, we jumped right in and did the first solar neighborhood, where we retrofitted a whole neighborhood of residential ranch homes, and the choice was made purposely because the ranch house is basically the common denominator. If it's in Santa Fe, it has clay tiles, but it's basically the same house. What we're going to do now is look at building integration. I mentioned the roof integration, which we thought was, from an architectural point of view, very desirable. A lot of high-end clients liked the idea of solar, but didn't like what it looked like hanging off the roof. Fully roof-integrated photovoltaics, companion roof-integrated solar thermal for space and water heating, lots of passive gain, and in North Carolina, a fair amount of sunshades to limit the gain in the summer months. Here's just an example of integrated systems. The first commercial system to be fielded was at Georgetown University, where the definition of integration is that the solar components displace conventional building materials to become part of the finished weathering skin of the structure. And this was a milestone, the first commercial building in the world. Just an example, this was a slate roof where the museum asked us to go solar. We had to remove the slate and make it integrated. BP retained us to help them roll out their solar-powered gas station program, which was coast to coast, and in fact, 16 countries across the globe. The canopies we helped them design were semi-transparent amorphous silicon, so sunlight would be coming through onto the service islands. And believe it or not, we even got BP in the early days, before the turn of the century, to add electric vehicle recharge ports to these solar-powered gas stations, pushing the future forward. Many of you in Southern California are familiar with the giant solar cube, which we were privileged to work on. This was sponsored by Southern California Edison, our sponsors today. It was a design-build project because nobody could give them a bid, so we came out and built it. Going to solar as integration in the facade. Lots of different options here. A building we did for the University of Oregon has the solar cells laminated in the glass that you were going to buy anyway, installed in the aluminum curtain wall structure, which you were going to buy anyway, that was modified so that it could have wireways that were UL listed so that we could run the wires so that nothing is hanging out. We also changed the packing density of the solar cells, sort of like the tinted band on your car windshield to keep the glare out when the sun is high in the summer. But down at the basic level of the 5-story atrium, they wanted a high visibility. In New York, the first solar high-rise has solar in the facade as opaque elements, not as window elements, and a custom bifacial solar cell canopy to welcome people at the street level. Ron mentioned the U.S. mission to the United Nations in Geneva. We were privileged to be asked by the U.S. State Department to take this very plain vanilla, it's almost like a parking garage with windows building. It's terrible. And they said, look, you've got carte blanche here. Bring us into the solar age. They had lots of thermal gain on this glass facing southwest. We provided a whole facade of integrated sunshades to reduce the cooling load, and facade-mounted solar, rooftop solar, et cetera, et cetera. Many of you are familiar with the Tiger Woods Foundation facility in Anaheim. This also has the laser-etched amorphous silicon thin film as the curtain wall. And you can see the sun attenuation. It also has solar on the roof. And now we're going to sunshades. This is a project many will be familiar with. Ed Smeloff, who's here with us today, was instrumental in making this project happen. It was co-sponsored by PG&E, and basically the first all-star or a major league sports stadium to go solar. Along the Port Walk, we integrated solar sunshades, and we even put solar on the scoreboard for PG&E to help them move their Green City program forward. Lots of other opportunities to show sunshades. This is a close-up of the AT&T Park, the State University of New York at Albany's new Science Center, EPA Region 1 Laboratory, a little bit of a different design, also facade integrated. Same thing here with this middle school in Massachusetts. It harvests the sunlight that otherwise would become a cooling load burden. Moving along to solar canopies, the MITRE Center in Massachusetts was going to have an entry canopy to get people from the parking area into the lobby. They thought that the roof covered with solar was a little bit underwhelming because nobody could see it. And so we decided, well, let's have a canopy that actually shows off this technology, specified custom bifacial modules that create a shadow pattern so when you're walking up to the building, solar shadows envelop you and you have to look up and be inspired. And it certainly has worked. More canopies, of course, parking canopies are pretty common these days. This is the California State Insurance Agency in Vacaville, and the parking was laid out so that we had to have these special pods designed to keep the solar facing south, and believe it or not, California was ahead of the game. Almost 10 years ago, we put electric vehicle recharge ports throughout the solar canopies. Walden Pond, which I'll talk about a little later, has parking canopies and electric vehicle recharge ports. This is a walkway canopy because we didn't have enough room on the roof to get to net zero on this building, which I'll mention later. And the same situation here, where we designed a clear span space frame truss to span the entire faculty parking lot at Oberlin College to help harvest sunlight for their academic center. Commercial and institutional buildings, we were privileged to work with PBS to power the first major television studio. This is the new building in Boston. More commercial work. Ron mentioned the 1996 Olympic Games. This was the first solar-powered Olympics, the natatorium, men's and women's swimming and diving competition. It was open air for the Olympics, but it was designed in advance to become basically a physical education center for the university. This was, when completed, the largest rooftop system in the world. The black bands are solar thermal to keep the competition pools comfortable for the athletes. We also designed this special barrel vaulted access to the Olympic venue because there's lots of queuing up in Georgia and it's pretty hot in the summer sun. This actually used the first module level electronics, which we pioneered in early 1996. It is now commonplace 20 years forward in 2018, micro level inverters. And this canopy had space between the solar cells so that sunlight could come through its structural glazing and its generation power. Interesting. We do wind. We don't do much wind. It's not that we don't like wind. However, it's darn hard to permit, and it's darn hard to site because the resources are not anywhere near as generously distributed as the sun is. This is on the harbor in Boston, where we're close to the ocean. The wind resources are reasonable. They're not ideal, but this is a training center for the electricians to help them understand their future. We have solar on the building in different types that they can work on as apprentices, and the tower has a ladder so they can actually get up and get personal and up front with this stuff and learn how to put it in place and how to keep it running. We graduated to a utility scale turbine, which we planted in the middle of the campus of Mass Maritime Academy. It's at the western mouth of the Cape Cod Canal at the head of Buzzards Bay. The flag is out straight every day, and it's an ideal wind site. What made this project really appropriate is this campus has a master college-owned medium voltage distribution system, which we could tie the wind turbine in directly so that all the electricity went to the college. Nothing got out through the substation. We also put solar all over their buildings, and this is the first wind-powered campus. Getting further along in time, we recently finished a building for Clark University where they wanted to maximize solar harvest, but of course the mechanical engineers had a bunch of rooftop units and ventilators, and oh my goodness, and it's like, this roof is awful. Well, we can't change it now. Well, what can you do? Well, we designed the array to float above the roof and give the college the maximum amount of capacity that we could harvest here and let the air flow freely around the HVAC equipment. As a young engineer, I was privileged to be on the roof with President Carter when he dedicated the first solar system and essentially initiated the solar age. I was also crushed as a young engineer when the succeeding administration decided that this was no way to conduct public policy and tore the solar panels off and consigned them to the dumpster. And I made it a personal goal to get solar back on the White House. It took me 20 years, but here we are. We parked the solar panels on the driveway. This is solar thermal. And tiptoeing by this office, because oftentimes, or at least there's supposed to be a lot of very important things going on in there. We made the thermal system roof integrated, so if they wanted to take it off, they'd have a big hole in the roof when they were done. There are 2 solar thermal systems and 1 solar electric system which still exist. And when Mr. Cheney found out about it, I got a letter from the White House counsel saying, you cannot talk about this or else you're going to be in deep trouble. And having a total brain fade, I wrote on the letter, this was not in our contract, put it in an envelope and sent it back. And then I went, like Homer Simpson, because we had top secret clearance despite the facial hair, and I didn't inhale, for this Department of State work. And they could have pulled that like that, but they didn't. Thank goodness they didn't. Here's a pop quiz for the solar folks and even facilities managers. What's wrong with this? What's wrong with this picture? Come on, anybody? You think? Now, this was probably the low bid and the shortest distance to the mechanical room. The greatest revolution in solar is actually in the developing world because they have no grid and they have no landlines. Everybody in the developing country now has one of these, and there's no landlines. And they're doing the same thing with electricity. It's wonderful to see. Countries all around the developing world are going solar. Back home, we had a bigger challenge, in some respects, a smaller challenge. We were asked to figure out how to put solar 1,000 feet above the street in central Manhattan on the Citicorp Tower, which was designed by Hugh Stubbins to actually receive solar, but Citicorp, as the building was built, wisely decided not to go forward because the technology was not ready. We've had 3 chances to put solar on this tower since it was occupied. The latest one being from Boston Properties, who wanted, let's say, a big, we've made it sort of display. We're still talking about it, but it's very challenging. The wind loads on this and the uplift, the negative loads from wind coming in the north, it's amazing. We got very impatient with the car manufacturers and hacked one of our Gen 2 Priuses. This is my son, who I'm very proud of. He's now a senior engineer at Solar Design, and this was a great father-son project. I had the idea, he did the work. And we had a Prius that was all electric. It had the same factory driveline, so you could drive it in hybrid mode with 75 or 80 miles per gallon. You could drive it with the electric alone and get about 45 miles, which I thought was a lot then, but it's pitiful now. And of course, you had the gasoline engine to help you out. Across the street from our offices, we designed and constructed, which was the easy part, the first shareholder-owned community solar garden in Massachusetts. It took us 2.5 years to permit it and 2.5 months to build it. There's no profit-making middleman. The subscribers are the shareholders, and all the benefits flow to them in proportion to the portion of the array that they have subscribed. I promised net zero in energy positive buildings. This is a house I designed in 1994 on the coast of Maine. It has our signature roof integrated solar thermal on the left, roof integrated solar photovoltaics on the right. The 2 technologies combined to form a single uniform glass plane that makes up the entire south roof. Glass never wears out, so you won't have to re-roof, and I kind of feel it's nicer. You'll notice also that in the dead of winter in northern New England, the windows are open. The windows are open because this is a passive solar house and it's summertime in January in Maine. And the site contouring and landscaping is part of the heating system. Can anybody tell me why or how? Come on, come on. Why do you wear sunglasses when you go skiing? Reflection, yes. This slopes to the southeast, and I get 2 or 2.5 suns on all of this glazing aperture in the morning. The house heats up wonderfully. The sun then obligingly moves off axis so the house doesn't overheat too badly. And we then start the rooftop array. But they do have to open the windows, and it's fun when the neighbors come by and say, Bill, your windows are open. It's January. Say, hey, take off your coat and get comfortable. A small environmental center. This is a learning teaching center for children. During summer, they go to environmental camp, and they learn about nature, and they learn about energy, and they learn about solar, and they learn about how trade-offs are made and how life systems work. Absolutely perfect for Fred and his address. The children are learning, and then they go home and teach their parents. Roof-integrated solar thermal again, roof-integrated photovoltaics. This is a net zero building in Mount Washington Valley, New Hampshire. Middle of America in Ohio, we were privileged to ask by Dr. David Orr, the chair of the Environmental Studies Department at Oberlin, to help him create the first net zero energy academic center on a university campus. There were some issues we faced. We got started late in the process. The architect had already finished his design, and we were presented with a building that was not going to make it. Day one, I told Dr. Orr, back of the envelope, maybe 30% of your energy needs will come from this roof. And what happened? Well, it was the first net zero project, but most importantly, he was unwilling and unable to collaborate, and we had trouble defining the project budget, but most importantly, the lack of solar aperture, and even worse, the lack of whole systems thinking, defining and maintaining an energy budget, et cetera, et cetera. Let me show you what happened here. It's a simple situation of whole systems thinking being completely absent, and an architect that had the ego the size of a tandem tractor trailer. He gave me a roof that 40% of the aperture is useless in the fall, winter, and spring because the angle of incidence is essentially zero. Thank you very much. Not only that, he gave me a curved roof. And anybody with basic electricity knowledge knows that if you've got a curved aperture for the array, you never get full sun. It's terrible. So what we had, here's the load profile, here's the solar electric harvest. It was about 27%. And then, because the geothermal wells, he had to have them right here, and he had to have them tight together, and of course they step on each other's area of influence. And so at peak demand, they had to put in a Volkswagen-sized electric boiler, and that's what you get. Dr. Orr was discouraged but not dissuaded. This is what I sent the architect. And basically he said, look, Stephen, you're the solar guy. The building's done. We can't get the architect to fix it. We need to have this net zero. What can you do? I said, well, you've got a faculty parking lot right nearby. We're going to build a long span space frame truss and basically cover that. It'll power your building and have enough to power the building next door. What do you think? He said, yes. So here's what happened when you step down the energy requirements and find that you're actually energy positive. And Dr. Orr, of course, it took an extra 1.5 years, but he got his building. I'll take you now to Walden Pond. As you know, Walden Pond, they don't even want to cut the grass, never mind cutting any more trees. And so the new Thoreau Memorial Visitor Center was to be powered by solar and net zero, and it was a fait accompli that the solar would be in the existing parking lot because that's got good solar access. We also added, of course, electric vehicle recharge ports along the way. And during the opening ribbon cutting, the head of the Department of Conservation and Recreation in Massachusetts invited us to show up on our electric motorcycles and, of course, plug in and charge so that everybody could see. And I got to tell you, I know this is nerdy, it's geeky, but there's nothing like running on sunshine. Another academic center, this is the first college academic laboratory to be net zero. We actually had to extend the aperture beyond the perimeter of the building because laboratories, of course, use a lot more energy, but we got it. The first government agency, at least in Massachusetts, to be fully powered by solar. It's a little bit energy positive by about 3 to 5%, depending on the weather patterns in a given year. And of course, it's the Fishery and Wildlife headquarters. I'm going to share this because Fred Schwartz asked me to. I don't usually do this. This is my house. It's in northern New England. It is energy positive because I have net metering with my co-op utility that already has 100% renewable supply. And I designed it for full-time occupancy, and my practice is still in Massachusetts. I have a $12,000 credit on my electric bill. And that includes all my transportation on property and off property. Passive solar, as you can see, lots of reflected sun, 2 or 2.5 times sun in the morning to warm it up. Super insulation, internal thermal mass, R10 glazing. That is the thermal integrity of a well-insulated 2x4 wall, and you can see through it. And when you put your hand on the glass and it's 15 degrees outside, it's warm. Active solar thermal, and for both space heating and hot water, 2,000 gallons of thermal storage, radiant heat distribution, no noise, no fans, no dust, no ductwork. A whole house heat recovery ventilation system, solar electricity, energy storage, and of course EV charging. That's what you can do in northern New England. You can do this pretty much anywhere. The formula for net zero success, I tell everybody that wants to listen, I'm a solar guy, but solar's the last thing I want you to do. Why is that? Because you've got to have efficiency, more efficiency, still more efficiency, conservation, and then owner and occupant commitment, and then you go to renewables for net zero energy. Success requires obsessive, aggressive efficiency in every aspect of the design process. Each and every design decision must take efficiency into account, and that produces a better building that's less expensive to operate and more resilient and has less maintenance. So it's all upside. And of course, you need an experienced, highly collaborative design team. You saw what happened at Oberlin. The next project I'm going to show you was a world milestone. The first multi-story office building to be energy positive. This is in Seattle, a relatively gloomy fall, winter, and spring. Wonderful summer. The first day we sat down with the architects, we said, you can't do this. They said, why not? We've already been retained. I'm saying, no, I'm not questioning your skills. This is Seattle. You don't have enough aperture. Oh. The woman who was the chair of the Planning Commission in Seattle, by the way, at that time there was a very healthy or maybe unhealthy competition between the city of Portland, Oregon, and Seattle, Washington as to who could be the greenest city. And so this woman was ready to go. She was stoked. And so I drew on the schematics, the yellow trace, roughly the footprint of the array we would need if we hit the very best energy model, which was about 20% of an average office building's energy consumption. And the chair of the Planning Commission was just perplexed. It's like, out over the city's rights of way, the air rights. I'll get back to you. A week went by, 2 weeks went by, I got a phone call, Stephen, I've got an answer. She's the chair of the Planning Commission, remember. I'm calling it an awning because the commercial code has provisions for awnings on commercial buildings, and no one had defined what an awning was, and she's the chair, and she just defined it. And of course, because of this competition with Portland, Oregon, everybody got in line, and there we were, off to the races. If she didn't do that, this project wouldn't have happened. Now, people make fun of it. I say, look, you went to college. You wore a hat like that. Don't criticize the building. Come on. The Living Building Challenge. Site, water, energy, health, materials, equity, and beauty. Crazy requirements, way beyond LEED Platinum. It produces an absolutely delightful work environment that is sun-filled, naturally ventilated, passively heated, passively cooled. All the water that's used in the building has to be harvested on site. This is the first building in the world, I believe, that has a state-licensed public water treatment system in its basement, and they're proud of it. Also, no waste can be put into the city system. It processes all of its waste on site. It makes all of its electricity with a surplus to share with the local municipal utility. It was pretty interesting building this project. That's not me up there checking the steel. That's a better man, a better man. So here's the idea of how you've got to reduce your energy demands. This is a normal office building that meets the Seattle Energy Code, not a typical old one, which is way up here. This is LEED Platinum with all of the energy credits given. And it is achievable economically if you look at the fuel costs going forward into perpetuity. I want to show you this graphically. This is the array that we put on. Yes, it hangs out over the air rights of the city roadways, but let me show you what would be needed if you didn't do the efficiency and just built it to code. It covers nearly 2/3 of the city block. And then stepping down to the energy code, half the city block. Stepping down further to LEED Platinum with all of the energy, 1/3 of the city block. And there's the array. Yes, it's greater than the footprint of the building. This is Seattle, it only has 3 months of sun. And then it's not sunny. Dennis Hayes, the client, you got to get it done. And the success formula, fully qualify the client. Do they really want this and do they want to make the investment? Fully qualify the site and the resources. Are the resources present? If they aren't, you can't get there. Retain the right architect, retain the right architect, retain the right architect, Build a winning collaborative design team. That means everybody has to have done this before. Everybody has to be fully committed to this mission. It is not business as usual, at least not quite yet, but we're making it that way. Nail the energy model. That's the target. How can you hit the target if there isn't a target? You've got to have a precise energy model, and that's the biggest challenge. We're asked to balance the energy equation. Our side of the equation is easy. Establishing the energy model is critical. Balance the energy equation, yes, we can do that if we get the energy model. Hire the right contractors, for goodness sakes. They have to care about what they're doing, and you've got to have good on-site inspection, and of course you've got to fully commission all the systems. This is another pop quiz, and it's a little close to home, so I hope I'm not stepping on anybody's toes. But what's wrong with this picture? The Southern California facade. Last I checked, the sun is high in the sky in Southern California. The solar should have been on the roof, but this is a perfect example of disintegrated design, where the landscape architects and the engineers and the site planners were just not communicating. I mean, God. And then the worst of it is, that really got my craw, they awarded the thing gold ratings and top 10 and honor awards, and this is public. It's saying, Oh, that's fine. That's perfect for solar. Yeah, just put it right behind the palm trees on the vertical facade, for God's sakes. Ah, ah. Ron mentioned King Abdullah University of Science and Technology. This was a pinnacle to be asked by one of the world's most popular and most experienced architecture firms to power the first university that was designed from the ground up to be fully solar powered. And these goals were amazing. 6 million square feet of world-class academic and research laboratories on a 3-year schedule. This was the King's legacy. And when the King announces a project, he also announced the day the ribbon cutting was going to occur. And you don't mess with the King, as people have heard recently. So, climate responsive design, of course, greatly exceed LEED Platinum, very aggressive, very aggressive energy efficiency, net zero energy beyond the state of the art, and of course, very smart grid. And this is not your typical community college. This is the King's legacy. They went all out. Amazing. But what's most amazing is the fact that every discipline has fully outfitted, completely state-of-the-art laboratories. And what are they studying? They're studying the future. I'll tell you more about that later. We covered every square meter of solar, with solar as we could, and then of course we had ground-mounted solar as well. And what are they studying? Advanced material sciences, of course renewable technologies, recycling and upcycling of key resources, advanced agricultural sciences, hydroponics and aquaponics, advanced water purification, and on and on and on. How do we meet today's needs in tomorrow's world? This was the King's legacy, and he announced when he dedicated the building that it's dedicated to post-petroleum sciences. That's the King of Saudi Arabia. And how did they finance it? Well, we paid for it. Oil sales equals dollars, and dollars equals renewable energy. The kingdom and the entire Middle East is going solar as fast as they can. Following on this project, we were asked to help with the gateway to Mecca, which sounds pretty grandiose, and in fact, it kind of is. You've heard about the hundreds and even thousands of people that are trampled during the annual pilgrimage to the Hajj, as a huge mass of humanity converges on this small site. And so this is a multimode transportation hub that's hopefully going to ease the crush of humanity. And we were asked, of course, to help power it with solar. It's a very innovative design. The architects created this canopy of louvers that keeps the direct sun out, but allows the wind and the breezes to flow through to cool the people in these heavy, I mean, they wear their winter. Yeah, too much clothes over there. But anyway, all of the solar is on the pedals, and it's an amazing design. It feeds the light rail and the electric intercity train, and et cetera, et cetera. This is the Vice President and Prime Minister of Dubai, in UAE, and basically he stated while I was there that we are now beginning our transition to renewable resources, our investment in clean energy at the same time, an investment in protecting the environment for generations. And what was the first thing out of the box in Dubai was the new headquarters for the Dubai Electricity and Water Authority. Awesome, awesome building. Giant sunshade to keep direct sun off the building and expand the area for solar harvest. This isn't fun. This isn't just imagined. They're building this. And it was an absolute privilege to be there to start it off. I'm sorry if this is, Energy storage is the next frontier. We started early. When photovoltaics first came into the marketplace, everything had storage that we did because you couldn't connect to the utility. The Carlisle house was the first one, and you know what? We were partnered and retained by MIT, And we were sort of torn between what we did there. Should we go to the utility and ask permission? And the learned, high-level, academic with all of the years of living and dealing and said, "Are you crazy? Just do it. It's easier to ask forgiveness, Stephen, heaven's sakes." Anyway, now it's commonplace, and here we have an energy-positive residence in northern New England. The clients wanted a 21st century farmstead. The animals are in the outbuilding barn, of course, fully roof-integrated solar electricity. The main barn, which is a garage and a studio place and a workshop for the owner's classic motorcycle collection, has integrated solar thermal. Both systems provide a surplus, and they have his and hers electric vehicle recharging. Remember, this is 10 years ago. Bimodal PV system, battery storage, solar thermal for space and water heating, radiant heat distribution, and all the other good things I mentioned before. PV array directly to the batteries, inverter. Now we have a backup or critical loads panel because you don't have to run your electric dryer when the utility fails. You don't have to run certain loads, and solar was expensive and the battery storage was even more so. And so when the utility goes away, this is a basic diagram, it doesn't show everything, but the main service panel is disconnected and only the critical loads, refrigeration, lights, water pumping, et cetera, This is what the electronics look like, power electronics. The yellows are the battery inverters, the gray ones are the solar inverters. There's a battery stack, I'll show you what it looks like. Basically, the footprint of a standard residential refrigerator. There's 75 kilowatt hours in each stack. This is how all the batteries are essentially done with horizontal connections. The bus bars are done vertically. There's a safety protection cover over it. And basically, that's true no matter which chemistry and technology it is. Stepping up to the community scale, we were asked to power an island off the coast of Massachusetts, Cuttyhunk. It's at the western tip of the island chain between the south coast of Massachusetts and Martha's Vineyard. And there's lots of logistics that you have to plan when you're building on the island. This is the tug bringing the barge to bring the truck to bring the post driver for the ground-mounted array. We had to put the array 1.25 miles away from the existing powerhouse because this was the only site that we could get a south-sloping open area. The solar array is put on the slope. The solar inverter is installed here. The battery and battery inverter are installed at the powerhouse. There's a megawatt of storage. This is lithium-ion in 2 500 kilowatt chunks, all with battery management, climate control in a container that can just be dropped on the slab and plugged in. The system, solar feeds AC to the grid. The existing generators that the island was running on were retained for backup because they're paid for and in place and functioning. A very large battery bank, as you saw, bidirectional battery inverter charger that can charge from the generators or from the solar on the AC side, and then distribution across the island. Getting larger in scale, community or campus, we were privileged to ask to power the campus of a small college in Western Mass. It ended up with 2.5 megawatt solar arrays because that's the land area they had available, 5 megawatts in total, and 1 megawatt of the Tesla Generation 1 power blocks for the storage. The system is similar in configuration. Direct DC into the batteries and into the grid with a bidirectional battery inverter, distribution on campus with medium voltage to the campus loads, and of course AC export when it's available through the utility meter into the substation and up to distribution. Stepping up to a larger, very much larger installation, 15 megawatts of utility scale storage at NextEra's peaker plant in Yarmouth, Maine. They put the batteries inside because this is Maine and lithium ion especially is sensitive to cold and does not perform as well, and so this is in a climate conditioned area with its own climate conditioning. The DC to AC inverters were put outside because they're happy to be cold. They run better when they're cold. And they used a lot of little ones because they were worried that if they had one or two big ones, they would be in trouble and prone to loss of power when one or two failed. So if a couple of them fail, the system still runs. That's still a good idea. This is what it's like to be inside a 40-foot long battery container with a megawatt of storage. You see all of the safety plexiglass on the connections. The bus bars are run vertical, then the bus bars are run horizontal. They're all tied together, and the lights work. Even better, the largest storage system on the planet to date was done, of course, by Elon Musk. Tesla's 100 megawatt, 129 megawatt hour at the Hornsdale wind farm, basically taking the intermittent wind and making it a constant supply. And shortly after this project was done, they had some sort of interruption, and the batteries took over within a second, and the grid operators didn't see any impact. It was amazing. And of course, Musk said he could do it in 100 days, and he did. It was amazing. Very simple schematic, of course. There's no solar here because the wind is external. The wind comes in through the substation into the batteries and then flows back out when it's needed. And they have artificial intelligence as the control overlay. It gets signals from the utility, and it has look ahead for wind speeds in the days to come, et cetera, et cetera. I'm sorry. We all know, of course, in Southern California, the further east you go, the more harsh the environment. We're all very much aware of how dry, how barren, how harsh, how beautiful, but how inhospitable to most vegetation a desert environment can be. But occasionally, once every 20, 25 years, you people know you live here, it's very seldom, but a very special event happens. The desert bursts into bloom. It's called the spontaneous super bloom. The right ingredients, the rain, the temperature, the season, the genesis of the seeds that have been laying dormant for years or decades, all come to life, and there's a flourish. And I would say, if you'll stretch this just a bit, that it could also be an analogy for a spontaneous technical diffusion. And that technical diffusion I'm talking about is our renewable future, which Fred Schwartz very eloquently painted for you at the beginning of this session. You see the cost of batteries is crashing. This is Bloomberg. This isn't my idea. Bloomberg digs in, they drill into this stuff. They've got the people to do this. That's what they do every day. They're tracking it. And this is the battery technology cost curve. And look at this. This was the cost per watt, roughly, when we started in solar. Well, that was for space. But we were down here at about about $15 a watt when we started. And as volume built, of course, you've got the cost down now to 61 cents a watt. And what happened when the cost barriers were progressively broken is volume went up. And now we have 65 gigawatts of solar. And this is old. And look at the costs here. Look at this. Look at this. The cost of solar plus storage or wind plus storage in a favorable resource environment now kicks the shit out of the conventional technologies. Coal, gas, and nuclear. Nuclears. We heard yesterday, one of the speakers said, we got 10 gigawatts of solar last year. How long does it take to get 10 gigawatts of nuclear? You can get 10 gigawatts of solar in 1 year. If you spend 10 years, you might get 1 gigawatt of nuclear. Maybe, if you've got the money and the cost overruns and all the rest of it. This is a fact. And again, it's not my data. Look at this. Look at this. Solar plus storage now beats out natural gas in electricity markets, obviously with a favorable resource, just as we have been told this part of the world is perfect for. We have broken the cost barrier, and solar is now unstoppable. Wind is now unstoppable because the economics are on our side. And that's what I call a spontaneous technical diffusion. And it is coming right now. Electric transportation is already here. Tony Seba, who's at Stanford University, he's a successful serial entrepreneur from Silicon Valley, made enough money. He's now decided to dedicate his life to making this transition accelerated. He's a futurist. He's awesome. I advise you to look him up. But he's saying not by 2040, but by 2025 to 2028, EVs will outsell gas cars. So think about trading in your gas car early because no one's going to want it. Not only are we driving, you're driving an electric car, you're driving an electric car, Ed, you're driving an electric car. Who's got electric cars? Look at that. More than half, 2/3. Awesome. How about electric transit? It's already in place, it's already in service, it doesn't even have to plug in. Rapid charge with inductive charging. You just pull in, bus driver has coffee, he's off again. Long-haul tractor trailers, they're already here. They're in service. One drove from the West Coast to the East Coast with nobody driving. A little scary? Yeah. There was a driver in the cab, but he was supposed to sit in the passenger seat. He maybe went to sleep in the bunk. High-speed electric trains, of course, that's decades ago. California is trying to do it. They've got a great example in Japan and in Europe. And even electric aircraft. There are prototypes that are smaller than this that are flying now. Electric helicopters are flying now. If I had more time, I'd show you the whole avionics, but I don't. The take home for you is that the solar electric future is now easily within our reach. Rooftop solar, EV charging, passive solar gain, super insulation, all of the stuff. Spontaneous technical diffusion, as Tony Seba tells us, will bring significant disruption to the electric utilities business as usual model, big oil, coal, gas, nuclear, etc. Gasoline stations are now starting. We have a commission to design the first filling station of the sort of future. It's actually a transition because it's still going to have gas pumps, but it's going to have rapid DC charging. And this is an independent gas station fleet owner who wants to upstage big oil. This is the first one, and it's in Boston. We'll tell you about it next year. Auto and truck manufacturers are going to have to change everything they do other than the chassis and the wheels. Auto and truck repair and parts suppliers, also everything we do, I'm going to nail it. Public transit, yes, trucking, regional airlines, aircraft manufacturers, and on and on. Here is Tony Seba. I want to recommend this fellow to you. He is awesome. All you do is Google tonyseba.com. You'll see about his clean disruption. His basic thesis is this is going to overwhelm us like a tsunami. It is going to be here faster than anybody thinks because once we cross the economic barrier, there's no holding it back. And my feeling is that it's now only essentially left in the public arena policy-wise. And what do we got? 89% favor more solar. 83% favor more wind. And the rest is dubious. We have a choice to make. This is sort of the illustration to Fred's talk. We have a critical fork in the road. We can continue with conventional technology, which engenders resource depletion, environmental degradation, geopolitical conflict, and brings about strife for resources. and perhaps war for resources, and if we continue unabated, the potential extinction of the human experiment, along with pretty much every other experiment of life. If instead we take this fork in the road and embrace sustainable technology and push it to the limit, we can engender resource conservation, environmental preservation, and social equity, and bring about new jobs and the potential for prosperity. This is not guaranteed, but it is certainly possible if we want it. Yeah. The future is in our hands, and the future is now. Thank you very much.